This podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, the world's leading international professional body which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. I'm your host, Simone Sweeney. I'm an executive and leadership coach following a 25-year career leading high-performing teams in companies like Apple and the Lego Group. In this new series, I'm delighted to introduce you to experts, coaches, and thought leaders as we make the case for why the future of great leadership is human. Discover how coaches are working to bring about a seismic change in how we define an incredible leader. We'll also consider the role of people versus technology and discuss why it's more important than ever to harness skills like self-awareness, communication, and gratitude, amongst others. In this series, our aim is to explore the very human capabilities and behaviors that will inspire a revolution in leadership and change the face of business. Today, I'm excited to be speaking about human-centric leadership with Liz Ryder. Liz, welcome to the Association for Coaching's podcast series on leadership. It's wonderful to have you.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
I'd love it if you could start with telling us a little bit about your journey through leadership and the work that you're doing.
Oh, wow. My journey through leadership. I think it started when I was very young, but I didn't really realize it. I was always a curious person. I always wanted to understand why people behaved in the ways that they behave. Which then took me on the route to become an organizational psychologist, which then brought me into businesses. And of course, a few not so good leaders later, I was like, I think there's a lot we could do here when it comes to leadership. So I've worked in multiple organizations, global organizations, and my last role was the global head of leadership at Volvo Cars. I'm extremely passionate about leadership and in particular in human-centric leadership.
Fantastic. And by way of an introduction, can you tell us a little bit about the work you're doing today?
Yep, I very much work between inspirational speaking. So I do a lot of events where I will kick off, maybe it's a leadership town hall, or it could be the start of an executive development program to inspire leaders to lead in a different way. I also work with executive coaching, and I also advise organizations when it comes to leadership. So I look at their leadership holistically. So one of the things that I've just recently done is gone into an organization, interview their leaders at different levels to really understand, how are they leading and where are some of the gaps. So those are some of the things that I do. Three main areas. It's the speaking, it's the coaching, and this leadership advisory.
So when I ask you this question based on your experience and your passion, I'm really excited to kind of hear, what does leadership mean to you?
Wow. Yeah, it's a big question, isn't it? I mean, many people have been trying to answer this question, but to me, leaders are people that set the direction. So they have some clarity about where we're going. And I say some because we are in quite a disruptive business environment, particularly post-pandemic. So that direction can shift. So they set the direction and then they enable their people to be able to deliver on that direction. And that means that they have to understand their people. They have to be able to nurture them, develop them, coach them to bring out the best. So that also means that they have to be able to get rid of the roadblocks. I'm in Sweden, so I often talk about it, so getting through the forest and moving all the sort of fallen down trees and leading through that so that your team can get on and do their jobs, essentially. That's what I believe is leadership. It's very much human-centric. It's very much people-focused, and it's very much about driving results through people.
And I love how in that definition you used a term like nurturing, and you speak about clearing obstacles and helping a leader to really enable the work that their team is doing.
Yeah.
But I think implicit in your explanation is that the leader is there to support, to remove barriers, to empower. And that also suggests a high level of engagement and connection. So there's been a lot of writing and kind of thinking about things like authentic leadership, terms like servant leadership in the last years and indeed decades. How is human-centric leadership different? And what is that at its kind of simplest definition?
There's a lot of similarity. And in some ways, I just want to say it's leadership. This is how leadership is, because we do tend to talk about transformational leadership or servant leadership. And when I go into companies, I say, but let's take the best of what we have when it comes to the models, the theories, the research. I mean, we've got a lot of data now. And let's call it your leadership. What is the leadership that you expect from your leaders in this organization? So back to the question, back to the human-centric leadership. Well, what is it? I think I'd like to take a couple of examples here of well-known leaders. So I'm going to go for Elon Musk. And if we think about Elon Musk when he first went into Twitter, he was very much a results-focused leader. I mean, he went in and he sacked the CEO, and I think it was about half of the organization. Very much focused on the results, maybe less caring about the people. Whereas if we look at somebody like Herbert Joly, who went into Better Buy and was able to turn that organization around, and he did that in a human-centric way. He was expected to go in and maybe cut costs and reorg, but he went in and he listened to the people. He tried to really understand what was going on in the organization by working with the people. And so what does that mean? It means that human-centric leaders tend to be self-aware. They tend to be compassionate. They build trust because they really understand their employees, as well as being able to be empathetic. And of course, I get a lot of pushback when I talk about empathy in leadership. There's no room for empathy in leadership, I'm told. And there absolutely is room for empathy in leadership. It's that understanding of the people that work with you and for you. You know, if you understand your people, if you can walk in their shoes, you can understand the difficulties that are arising. You can support and help them to get through that. And empathy isn't necessarily being nice. You know, as an empathetic leader, we have to be able to make those tough decisions. And perhaps when somebody hasn't been performing, perhaps when we've nurtured and developed them and we're still not getting the results, we have to be able to say goodbye in a way that's respectful of that individual. So empathy is not a weakness, it's a strength, and a much needed strength in organizations today.
I love how you have spoken to kind of the pinnacle leadership examples that may be out there. And a lot of people will look to almost these kind of hard line leaders of the past.
Yeah.
You know, often when I'll ask people I work with is who's an inspirational leader, it will be people like Steve Jobs or Elon Musk or even Winston Churchill.
Absolutely.
But I think it's fabulous. You've brought in the Best Buy example where you are looking to human qualities rather than kind of innovation and kind of driven, almost obsessive kind of change and progress cultures. And speaking to behaviors and some of those competencies of which many people would deem kind of the quintessential soft skills, things like self-awareness, the importance of trust, empathy. If you look at human-centric leaders, when they're partnering with their teams, when they're supporting their employees and driving them, you know, supportively towards a direction, those soft skills become absolutely critical. It's something I've experienced through my career. I'm sure is the same for you. But a lot of people would probably argue that those can't be taught. Can we teach someone to be more self-aware. How do we foster empathy?
Yeah, we can absolutely teach people. I mean, it goes back to are leaders born or are they nurtured? And of course, some people are born with these skills. Other people need to work with them and to develop them. So we can absolutely teach empathy. And I think one of the things we have to be really careful here with the advent of AI is that there was one piece of really interesting research recently from, I think it was Cambridge University, that talked about how we are more likely to accept feedback from a machine than from a human. Now, that's very fascinating to me. And as AI progresses, we are starting to see people say AI is empathetic, which of course it's not, because empathy is a human emotion. It's a human skill. I am empathetic. I'm a highly empathetic person, and that can be a disadvantage sometimes because I can feel the emotions of other people. So I have to be able to moderate that, of course, because that's not great in business if I'm constantly going around being upset because something happened. So I have to be able to moderate that. But yes, we can absolutely teach the soft skills. And I think Ryan Roslansky, the CEO of LinkedIn, recently said that they'd looked into executives, they'd asked them, what skills are important, and that 72% said that soft skills are more important than AI. I think that's fascinating.
It is a really interesting future laid out behind, or laid out before the business kind of community in thinking about AI and how technology will support us. And I'd love to come back to that in a few moments. But first, let me ask you this. You mentioned kind of nature versus nurture in the terms of leadership development. Was there a point where you kind of had a realization that you believed more in a human-centric leadership approach, and you could have actively transitioned or mindfully transitioned to that? Or is it something that was always there for you?
Yeah, I think to an extent it's always been there in terms of my skills, my soft skills. But I've seen how we have evolved. If you look at the bigger picture, I often get frustrated and think things are not moving as quickly as I want them to. And then when we look back, we can see how far we have come. We are moving much more into this domain of human-centric leadership. I mean, if you take Microsoft as an example, I mean, they were recently valued at $3 trillion. I mean, absolutely incredible. But Satya Nadella, when he took over as the CEO, one of the things that he said was that empathy is probably one of the most important skills you need as a leader. So we're starting to see more role models that are human-centric. Now, I don't know Satya Nadella, so people might be listening and saying, no, he's not human-centric. But from what I see from the outside, he has many of the behaviors that I would expect from a human-centric leader. So I think the more role models we get in different organizations, then the more we believe in human-centric leadership, and then the more human-centric leaders we see. We've had very much results-focused leaders for many, many years. I mean, that's what we've grown up with. That's what we know. So it takes that time for it to develop. So I think now is the moment. Post-pandemic is absolutely the tipping point for leadership, is what I believe.
And that example of Satya Nadella, speaks also to a great example of maybe a shift in leadership culture, where you contrast Nadella with Bill Gates, which is he was a more traditional, kind of results-oriented, highly focused leader that you could argue didn't have as strong a focus on the individuals. And, this is something I've experienced also in my career, is working as a more human-centric leader myself, but working with those who have a more results-driven orientation. And that often can cause great friction in a team when you have that kind of clash of leadership styles, and particularly where you have relationships which have a high degree of kind of collaboration and connection, where you have two leaders who are working in concert to deliver results. How can coaches support that kind of leadership conflict style clash? Is there anything that we can do in those environments to support our clients to adapt, reflect, and make the best out of what is fundamentally two very different styles?
Yeah. And I think you've almost said it in what you said there. How can you adapt and reflect? It makes me think of a leader that I worked with who was heading up regional sales. And she was doing an excellent job, very much human-centric, had the best sales figures. She very much saw her team as individuals. She treated them as individuals. She responded to their different needs. Very successful. Then along came the new head of sales, who was results focused, very much results focused. And when she said, we're very successful, we're the highest performing region, her new leader's response was, well, that's just luck. It's just luck that you're getting these results. It's got nothing to do with what you're doing working with the team. You need to be bolder. You need to push them more. You need to get more out of them, was the message. So there we go. Results focus versus human-centric focus. And that took a lot of time to work and turn that around for the boss to, and I call her a boss now because I think that's more boss behavior than leadership behavior, for that boss to be turned around. I do think you've got to show the evidence, show the results to be able to help them to see self-awareness, understanding how their behavior is perhaps having a negative impact on the team. It's not an easy one.
Yeah, it's a challenging one, something I experienced myself and I see with my clients all the time, that conflict between kind of a boss, even a manager and a leader. And while they share common traits and responsibilities, how the work is done distinguishes between probably the three. And that sometimes tension of different styles becomes a critical thing to relate to. And it's not what you do, it's how you do it more. It's working style rather than results.
Exactly. Yeah. And there was I don't know if you've read the study by James Zenger, who looked at results focused versus people focused, and looked at 60,000 employees and asked them who's the most effective leader, the leadership style, the results focused or the people focused. And effectivity came in at 14% for those that were results focused, so it's pretty low, and 12% for people focused, still very low. But when leaders were both results focused and people focused, are able to merge the two, 72%. It's a huge jump.
Wow. So
when we're able to drive results through people, that's when we're really getting the effectiveness. And David Rock, who is a neuroscientist, he predicts that there's 1% of leaders that are both. And there's a very good reason for that, because of our brains and the way we're wired. We tend to either to be able to focus on results or people. But the good news is we can develop that. So
fantastic.
There's a positive message there.
Yeah, absolutely. The fact that a blend of competencies and behaviors is then the kind of the catalyst for effective team leadership. And that brings us really nicely to the role that a coach can play in helping someone to understand their leadership strengths and identify any development opportunities. So how do coaches fit into the mix? What work can they do with people who would like to sharpen their leadership skills?
I think the self-awareness is critical. I mean, in my experience as an executive coach, and quite often the leader will come with some kind of people problem. It's their problem. They're the problem. It's never, I'm the problem. And I think to be able to understand, but how am I as a leader contributing to that problem? Because it always goes back to the leadership. So if I, as a leader, am micromanaging, then of course that's going to impact on the team. So I would always go back to the leader and try to find out, what is it they're doing? How are they behaving? I think of one example, a senior director in a pharmaceutical company. And she told me in our coaching session that she was such a people-centric leader. She said, I put my team first. They're really important to me. And I was like, fantastic. Great. I said, it would be great if I could maybe do a 360, an interview 360 with your team. Absolutely, she said. And so, of course, I did that. And I think you're probably going to know the end of the story. When I did that, I found out that she wasn't so people-centric. She cancelled her one-to-ones on a regular basis. She was often seen almost running down the corridors with, her phone, busy. When the team spoke to her, maybe said, good morning, how are you? Oh, I'm so busy. So she'd created this environment of not being approachable, not having time, just not being available. And so we talked about this. And of course, I don't have time. I don't have time to have lunch with people. I'm so busy. And what we worked on is her taking those words away. Anytime anyone asked her, how are you? Stop saying I'm busy, because that's putting up a blocker. And she reframed that. She started having lunch with her team once a week. She freed up her time to do that. And she made sure that her one-to-ones were a priority. And of course, that saved her time. She started to be able to identify problems before they became problems, because they would just come up in conversation over lunch or in the one-to-ones. They were brought up early. And when I hear leaders telling me today, oh, we don't have one-to-ones, they're all adults, they know what to do, I think you're missing an opportunity here. So as a coach, really working with that self-awareness, helping that leader to see the impact of their leadership on their team.
As this is a podcast, the people listening will not have caught my kind of slight smile, stroke, grimace, stroke, eye roll on the we don't need to have one-to-ones conversation. Because, indeed, as we do get busy within, the day-to-day and also managing the realities of our lives outside of work, that kind of perception of business grows and that kind of projects to the team. And you kind of assume that everyone's kind of in a more evolved way. And in the example of the relationship you've just spoke to, you had a leader there who was lacking a degree of self-awareness, did not realize that there was a different perception than the reality of her support of the team, but was also projecting that aura of busyness, which made her much less approachable. But small behavioral shifts made the difference there. And self-awareness is one of those challenges that is fundamental to address when working either within a team or within an individual particularly. You mentioned 360 feedback and getting the voice and the perceptions of others. What are other tools that you can recommend to those listeners out there who are working with leaders to help break open the conversation about self-awareness itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are many. I mean, obviously, psychometrics. I'm an organizational psychologist, so I've used psychometrics a lot to be able to start the conversation. I do a lot of, as I say, these interview 360s. I find that they are better than the written 360s. There's a lot of misinterpretation, I think, with the written word. I think just being able to talk through what people are saying. Observation's always a good one. I've been able to sit in quite a few leadership teams and to actually observe and to be able to give feedback in that moment of how that leader is coming across and the impact on the team, noticing how did the team member react when you spoke in that way. One example that I have is of an executive who was with his team, really keen to get sort of psychological safety within the team. And he said, right, I want us all to talk about our problems. Business problems, he meant, not personal problems. I want us all to talk about our problems. And the first enthusiastic leader, the vice president, went, okay, and spilt it all out. These are the issues in the business. This is what is happening. And as she finished, he went, don't come to me with those sort of problems. I want solutions. So nobody else spoke after that. They all came back with the positive messages. So these sort of behaviours, it's really important for them to be highlighted and seen. And I'm under no illusion that takes time.
So it's feedback, observation, and also a healthy degree of reflection from the leader who's being coached to look at their behaviors and what is appearing from the feedback and observation. And you speak there to psychological safety, and trust, of course, is a kind of a deep condition for human-centric leadership as well. How can coaches work with leaders and their teams to explore what psychological safety needs to be, where it's maybe dysfunctional or where there is a gap in trust?
Yeah, I think, I think you've raised the reflection point. I think it's really important for leaders to be able to do that reflection, either in the session with the support of the coach, or to be able to do that on a weekly basis at least. So have that 30 minutes reflection time just built into the calendar to think about my team. What happened this week? Where were the points where perhaps there wasn't psychological safety? And to pick up on some of the, what I would call nuances, some of the things that are not being said. I believe that we don't always listen so well as individuals. We think we listen, but we don't really do so. So to be able to pick up on, the body language, the facial expressions. When I was in that meeting on Tuesday, I came out and we didn't get the result that I wanted. What did I do to contribute to that? What could I have done differently? Why was it that John walked out with his shoulders hunched down and went very quiet in the meeting? What was it that I did to contribute to that? And it might not be you. It might be somebody else in the team that has taken away the psychological safety. But it's really important to reflect on yourself and the other members of the team.
And I think both of these kind of streams, looking at self-awareness, psychological safety, trust, you're highlighting the importance of that kind of human connection, the time spent, the observation, listening, spending time together. And in a world where we're very busy and faced with new technology, there, I think, is a temptation for some to be looking towards AI and other kind of technologies still to emerge on the scene, to do some of the heavy lifting of leadership. And what we're speaking about right now is the kind of the polar opposite of that, of having that direct connection and being able to see and explore and feel and sense what a team is, how a team is reacting, how a team is behaving with their leader. So how does AI play into this for you? You spoke a little bit about it earlier, but what is the future of leadership, looking at some of these kind of enabling technologies that are here, but very firmly on the horizon?
When I go into organizations and talk about leadership, quite often I am met with management. So I will hear, oh, yes, we have to fill out our performance review forms or, online. Or I'm met with oh, yes, it's all about objectives, or it's all about what I would call the management side of leadership. Often it's the processes, it's the financial reporting, budgets. That's the focus area because that's really tangible. I can understand that. And when I say, what about leadership? How often do you talk about leadership? I'm often met with this confusion. Well, what do you mean? And how often, do we go home at the end of the day and say we set the budget or we recruited the management tasks? How often do we go home at the end of the day and say, you know what, I inspired my team today, or I motivated that person and they're not going to leave anymore? We don't tend to do that. So where does the AI play into this? Well, I really see AI taking on the more management tasks. I would love it to see that, we've had our regular ones, we've taken notes, and AI has been able to summarize and say, hey, Liz, this is the review of her during the last year. And then I can take that summary, because I see so many managers spending a lot of time on those performance review tasks. I think all of that can go over to AI, and that leaves leaders with the opportunity to lead, to be human, to have their one-to-ones, to spend time with their teams, to really deeply listen to people. I mean, how often do we miss a great idea because we don't understand it, because we don't have time? We've got a meeting and we're on to the next meeting and the next meeting and the next meeting. We've both been in the corporate world. That's what happens. Back-to-back meetings, emails on the fly as you run into the next meeting. And where's the time for thinking? Where's the time for reflection? So I believe that AI can in the future and will enable us to be human and to really maximize those human skills that we have. Because, if we don't develop our soft skills that we actually are good at, then AI is going to get better and better. So we really have to focus on being human.
I love that perspective and how we could use technology to enable us to focus on that human aspect, to put the absolutely vital and necessary management tasks, the performance reviews, the kind of keeping up with the financial reporting, all of the tasks that we have, using technology to handle those and free up the human aspect for us to think and to innovate and to connect and to be in our workspace. And you speak to busyness, and I was joking with someone yesterday about my calendar when I was working full-time, in a big corporate. I not only would I have, meetings all day, there were many days where you would have 2 or 3 meetings at the same time, and you were scheduling time to eat or even to pop to the loo, which is ridiculous if you think about it kind of from a distant perspective. And a lot of the people that I work with, and I'm sure it's absolutely the same for you, it's certainly the same for friends and colleagues, we are very time poor. So to be thinking about AI as an enabler to allow us to do that human work is absolutely, critical to our, let's say, future success.
Yes, but I think so. And I don't know if you've read the Boston Consulting Group report on AI and how employees are reporting that it's saving them 5 hours per week.
Amazing.
Now, just imagine what you can do with 5 hours a week. You could spend a lot more time with your team. You could be focused on time to think, time to innovate, time to be strategic. But of course, those are all the things that come to the bottom of the list of priorities in organizations. And it's a big mistake. It really is. And I've seen it. I've got one example of a graduate I was mentoring. And this wasn't AI, this was more automation. But he'd been able to take a very complex series of Excel documents. There was many, many Excel documents that he had to merge and come up with a report that took 2 days. So he said to me, I've just written a little program and automated it, and it now takes 2 hours. I said, oh, great. So what are you doing with all of that extra time that you've got? You've just saved all this time. He said, I'm busy. I've got other things to do now. So the danger is AI frees up our time, but we carry on being busy because we're used to being busy. That's what you do in companies. You're busy. How can we get away from this busyness syndrome and allow ourselves that time to think, to reflect, to have deep conversations?
That's such an important reminder for us, Liz, isn't it? That as we create solutions that solve the problems of that kind of time poverty, we need to also shift our behavior in not just filling it with more of the same that was, sucking our time away. And this is a topic we're going to explore in another episode as well, in looking at kind of the future of work and how our work models need to change, and AI. So I know we'll revisit this topic again, but I hope it's something that is on the agenda for so many leaders right now and so many organizations, is that there is a real opportunity to do things differently that allows much better business results, much more effective working, but also happier, healthier employees. So in that light, what are some of the things that an organization could be shifting to now to be more human focused? AI is coming, great to prepare, and everyone should be, but are there behavioral shifts or programmatic or principle shifts companies can be doing today to be more focused on making the most of their humans?
Yeah, I would say at a high level that they could see leadership as more important than they do. My experience is a lot of organizations talk about leadership being important, but are they actually behaving that way? And that's a big difference. I mean, I'm sure you've seen the same. You go into a company, they've got their leadership framework, their leadership principles. But when you go and talk to their leaders and employees, are they actually living those? So we've all seen it, the PowerPoint, the words on the wall. That's one thing, but making that come to life. So for example, one organization I was working with said that collaboration was so important. But when I went into the organization, I found that there was a lot of silos. There was a lot of competition between the different functions. We're the best. No, we're the best. Well, that's not collaboration. So that could be a really good start in a lot of organizations. Look at your principles, your values, your framework, and how are we living that day to day? Because that's what it's about. It's those small behaviors that make up the culture of the organization. So if we're not collaborating, if we're promoting leaders that are individual contributors who never collaborate, then we're not living that. So I think it's really important to be able to ensure that we're living those behaviors and start small. Everyone can make one positive change each day, each week, that will lead to a better workplace for everyone.
I love that kind of individual steps constantly being taken. Culture is something you do, not something that is. And that kind of active embrace and movement towards constantly refining, improving, having the hard conversations, having deeper connections. What role does a coach play when invited into either a team or working with a senior leader particularly to help unleash the power and the potential of having kind of a connected, human-focused team?
I just see coaching is transformational. I mean, it absolutely is. And I think this is one of the pieces that we need to hold on to as coaches, that yes, we can have transactional coaching. And I think we need some of that. I mean, I listened into a course from LinkedIn the other day that how can we use ChatGPT to help us to coach our people. So, and it was pretty good. I mean, the questions that came out were pretty good. I was like, right, okay, yeah. So we need to make sure that we are transformative in what we're doing. And as coaches, we observe what's going on in the room. We observe the person. We look out for those conflicts between what is being said and the behavior. And we really understand human beings and how they tick. So we have a lot to bring to the table as coaches. And what is the return on investment? I mean, it ranges from 221% upwards, because we are transforming. We are enabling people to have that space to be able to reflect and think, to shift their mindsets, to shift their perspectives, to question their values. Am I living my values? Am I true to my values? So I think I'd love it if every leader had a coach. I would absolutely love that. I think that would be fantastic and beneficial to the organizations.
I love how you speak to that, where you are looking at coaching, creating the space and the time, but also the focus on your leadership approach and that deep reflection. And you mentioned earlier the importance of feedback, of observation, of listening, and where coaches, can do incredible and transformative, and truly transformative work with leaders is in that space where inviting that consideration to the behaviors, the skills that they employ, and how people react and how you can adjust and you can grow to kind of build that leadership approach and within the human space as well. You mentioned there sitting in on the ChatGPT session of looking of how coaches can or how coaching can support leaders in organizations using things like ChatGPT, AI, etc. A lot of our listeners will have heard or be intimately familiar with the kind of the term leader as coach. What does that mean, and how is that distinct for in an organization to coaching a leader versus helping to develop a coach acting as a leader within their team or their business?
This is a very interesting one, because the research tells us that if an organization has a predominantly coaching culture, they are more likely to be high performing. So 61% compared to 27% that don't have a coaching culture. And when I talk to leaders, quite often I get the response, of course, we don't have time to coach. And as a leader, of course, it's very different to us as coaches, maybe spending an hour with one person. But of course, leaders can do that as well. In their one-to-ones, they can dedicate an hour to one person. But what does it mean as a leader, as a coach, is what I would call a coaching in the moment. So when that member of your team comes to you and asks a question, or I don't know how to do this, the seemingly quick response is to tell them. Whereas that approach isn't helping that person to learn and develop themselves. So when we ask a question instead of telling the answer, then we're enabling that person to grow. And I think that's a biggie for me. A lot of leaders just, no time. And when I've actually run coaching workshops with leaders, I've done that whole, right, okay, we're going to ask the great, powerful, open questions. Most of the time, we'll see them get to sort of question 3 or number 3 before they go into a more closed or directive question. So I think there's a lot that we can learn from that. Coaching in the moment, and yourself, you can have 5 minutes coaching of asking great questions, and what a difference, what a shift that will make. So I'm a big believer in enabling leaders to be able to ask those coaching questions. It has a high value impact. It's coaching for the future. It's coaching for success. But a lot will say it's just quicker to tell. But of course it's not. It's an investment in that individual.
It's so interesting that we're coming back again and again to the kind of the concept of busyness and the need to create kind of focus and time, and that an investment in something like working towards creating a more coaching-led style of leadership pays the dividends of saving the time and avoids the trap of I'll just do it myself and micromanagement, which destabilizes the team in terms of reducing psychological safety,
Sure.
driving stress, burnout as a result of that, damaging trust. So it's almost as if so many leaders are kind of caught in this vicious circle. And,
Yes.
I have always kind of lent towards being a more human-centric leader myself. But if I could go back and tell myself at the start of my leadership journey, 20 odd years ago, ask questions, create the space, have that kind of coaching, even that coaching questions training to just approach things in a different way. You think of how many opportunities would have been created and saved. And as we think about leadership now and that kind of shift from boss to manager to leader and then to coach, as the maybe next evolution of a leader's journey, is there a future where there are no managers anymore?
I think so. I think moving away from that formal manager role into a coaching role, certainly organizations, I think many of you have heard of the case study of Time, etc., who actually took away their managers and replaced them with coaches and saw an increase of productivity by 20%. If we look at Canva, which is quite a new business, probably about 10 years old, that works a lot with social media content. So I use it a lot for posting on LinkedIn, so I can create my own frameworks.
Me too.
So I use Canva a lot. And one of the things at Canva is that everybody has a coach, because they see the impact of having a coach, somebody who can be there to support you, to help you to be at your best, to be able to be a high performer. So I do see a future. I would love to see a future where you could almost select your leader, because talking to a leader yesterday who is in a terrible state because he's switched leaders. He had a fantastic leader. He was getting wonderful engagement scores. And then suddenly he changes to a new leader who is a bad, toxic, awful micromanager. And that's had a massive impact on him. Huge impact. So if we were able to choose leaders who are more coaches, somebody that works for me, I'd love to see a future like that we get away from all of this bad behavior that we see that really does have a very negative impact on our businesses and our people, of course.
That concept of choosing your own leader is an incredible one to ponder. And I can relate absolutely to the impact of shifting from a great leader to a leader that you don't connect with, or that it is truly not a leader in any sense, and the destabilizing impact that has on not just the well-being of the people working in that situation, and for both sides, of course, because when there's tension, no matter who's doing what, both sides will feel the pain of that difficult relationship. But it always spills over into the work and into the wider team.
But absolutely, always.
And you mentioned there engagement scores and things like, annual employee surveys where you look at the well-being, the happiness, the health of your team. Often I have seen, and again experienced myself, seismic shifts in what those surveys are reporting, where there have been some changes, either organizational or leadership, or maybe the context of the work, where those reports often go unchecked.
Yes.
No attention is put on them. What's the danger then of using, if there is danger, not to be too leading with the question, but when you see a shift like that, should the leadership structure be looking at it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're going to ask people to spend their time investing in an engagement survey, then we have to listen to them. And again, I have seen it so many times when maybe there's several hundred leaders that are below benchmark when it comes to engagement, and we just ignore it, or we don't take it seriously. The better companies actually do something about that. And I'm not saying point fingers and say you're terrible, but support leaders. Leadership is hard. So we need to be able to support those who are maybe not doing so well, who are not able to engage their team. not ignore it. Because again, that feeds into my comment of before, that we're then not taking leadership seriously. And I know some organizations who, Microsoft is one of them, that says, engagement scores need to be up there with financial reporting. They are important. We need to listen to our people. And when we get that feedback, we need to act upon it. If people have taken the time and we don't act upon it, then we're going to lose them. It's as simple as that. So if we're asking for feedback, then we need to do something about it. So it wasn't a leading question. I believed you anyway. It has a negative impact.
Absolutely. It's if you're going to the trouble of doing the feedback, doing the process to secure the feedback, to act on it. I think that becomes just the obvious answer there. As we've had this conversation, what's so inspiring is that there are so many ways to be a human-focused leader, human-centric leader.
There's just one thing that's buzzing in my head about leadership, and it sort of goes back to what we said before. I think we're still in this old way of leadership and thinking, because when I ask leaders, like you said before, you ask leaders, describe a good leader. Who's a good leader that you can cite? And it's often a politician or, famous people, as you say, like Steve Jobs. But when I ask them to think about a leader that they've had who was great and effective, that brought out the best in themselves, that's a bit longer. It takes them longer to think about that one. But when I ask them what was it about that leader that made them so effective, they will cite all the soft skills. He or she helped me develop, he or she supported me, had my back, built trust, created the psychological safety. Every single time I ask that question, wherever I am in the world, it is the same. It is the same soft skills that come up. And I think that's interesting. So what we think we want and what we actually need are two different things. This perception of the leader who commands the boss is not right. And again, we see that in the research. When we select leaders, we often find that those in high potential programs are ineffective leaders. I think it's 42% are seen to be ineffective leaders. And again, I've seen that because bias comes into play. We select people like us, and so it continues. So we have to get better at promoting the right leaders. And I often wonder, why do we ask leaders who is the right leader to promote? Surely it's the followers. Surely it's the employees that we should be talking to. Is this person a good leader? Is this person bringing out the best in you?
I love that you've just brought that in of looking at the followers and the people that are being led, and the kind of the concept of choosing your leader there. And I think we could have a whole podcast episode, if not a series, on those who lead up rather than those who lead.
Oh, yes. Don't get me going on that one.
Yeah, I think that might be an explosive one for another time.
Oh, yes.
But thinking of that more broadly, we have explored a great deal about the behaviors that do make someone a well-connected, human-centric leader. What's the one kind of skill a coach could tease out of someone quickly to make a difference? Speaking to the coaches who are listening today, is there one thing where you would say, Liz's guide to shifting towards human-centric behavior from today, this is it. This is the one thing you can start to do immediately?
For us as coaches, this is really simple. It's listening. We're really good at it. But I would say, now I'm going to generalize, but I would say it's difficult for leaders to listen, really listen, to really understand what is being said to them. It's almost, as a leader, I have to talk. I have to be the one in control. So I think listening is just, so underrated. Yet we know how important it is. And we know as coaches the transformational impact we are making. We see it. We don't shout about it to everyone who want to hear us, but we know what a difference we have made to an individual. So imagine if an organization had all their leaders who were able to do that, we would have some amazing organizations. But so listening, it's going to be my number one tip.
Amazing. A whole world of leaders who listen and connect. I could speak to you all day on this topic, Liz. It's truly been inspirational and so thought-provoking. So let me ask you this as a final kind of question. What's your one pearl of wisdom for coaches who work with leaders?
My one pearl of wisdom for working with leaders. They are trying to do their best. Every leader I meet is not trying to be mean, trying to be a bad leader. They are really trying to do their best. And they're following a pattern of leadership that has been around for decades and decades and decades. We've always led in a very similar way. So it's no surprise that we continue to lead as we always have done. And it's no surprise that the next generations are coming in and copy-pasting the leadership that they see. So we have to be kind to leaders, we have to understand leaders, and we need to help them and enable them to find that new way of leading. Because we know it. They don't yet, and they don't always understand the importance of human-centric leadership. So help them to understand the importance of human-centric leadership.
Fantastic. I love how you're positioning that and taking us right back to the beginning of the conversation, really, is that coaches, when they display empathy and understanding, can help foster that empathy and connection within the leaders they work with.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Liz, for your passion and your engagement today. I've massively enjoyed this conversation. I'm sure our listeners will have as well. Where can people go to find out more about the work that you're doing or to get in touch with you?
They will find me on LinkedIn, Liz Ryder, with an I, of course. I am there. I will post a lot about human-centric leadership. I tend to post lots of tips and quotes and things that I hope that people find helpful to enable more human-centric leadership in our organizations today, because I think people deserve that. I think we have a lot of potential in companies that we often overlook. And if we could just enable leaders to unleash that potential so that everybody is thriving in organizations. I mean, what a wonderful workplace we would have. So yeah, LinkedIn, that's where I am. Come and find me, come and say hello, come and come and chat. I'm always up for talking about leadership. Always.
Fantastic. And thank you so much for sharing your energy and your wisdom with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Really great to talk to you.
Thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. For over 20 years, our purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organizations, and society. To find out more about the AC and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or visit our webpage at associationforcoaching.com. Explore our digital learning hub and enjoy our extensive library of on-demand webinars, signature programs, member benefits, interviews, podcasts like this one, and a portfolio of live events featuring thought leadership, tools, models, and the latest industry trends to help you develop your coaching expertise.